Welcome to Parallax. Parallax, the construction amidst eternal decay. Parallax, the portal to the edge of chaos. Parallax, poem and provocation.
Okay, welcome to Parallax Poetry Salon, Scout Rainer Wiley. It's great to have you here. You've worked with Parallax before. You've done a course with Lehman Pascal. We don't know each other personally, but I respect your work from afar. And it says you give a very modest bio because you do a lot of things, but it says you are a ritual artist living on lands traditionally stewarded by the Cherokee, weaving threads of animist practice, systems theories, and religious studies. They offer a poetic prose to water the roots of an emerging regenerative culture. So, as I always do, I'm going to read a poem, just something that came out of thin air, and before to just connect us with the lineage of great poets. This is called The Ballad of Moon Moon by Federico Garcia Lorca. Moon came to the forge in her petticoat of nard. The boy looks and looks, and the boy looks at the moon in the turbulent air. Moon lifts up her arms, showing, pure and sexy, her beaten tin breasts. Run, moon, moon. If the gypsies came, white rings and white necklaces, it would beat from your heart. Boy, will you let me dance when the gypsies come. They'll find you on the anvil, with your little eyes shut. Run, moon, moon. I hear the horses' hooves. Leave me, boy. Don't walk on my lane of white starch. The horseman came beating, the drum of the plains, the boy at the forge, has his little eyes shut through the olive groves, in bronze and in dreams. Here the gypsies come, their heads riding high, their eyelids hanging low. How the night heron sings, how it sings in the tree. Moon crosses the sky with a boy by the hand. At the forge of gypsies, cry and then scream. The wind watches, the wind watches the moon. So, without further ado, Scout Rainer Wiley.
Thank you, Andrew. I really like that poem. I'd love for you to send it to me when you get a chance.
Will do.
Wonderful. So, most of my poems don't actually have names, but I typically publish them on Substack with titles because Substack won't let me do otherwise. So I will be introducing them with names, but just know that they are actually in their essence untitled. So this first one is Becoming the Ocean's Skin. I am in love the way a body is in the mountains, held from all angles, nothing beyond them visible. I am in love the way a body is in a forest, noise becoming symphony, swallowing whole beyond whole. I am in love the way a body is in a lake, breath granting me buoyancy, skin becoming the ocean's skin. I am in love the way a hand is in another hand, the way his hand held mine, the way his hand held mine. This one is When All the Vegetables Are Gone. I have always loved those little bands that hold fresh vegetables together. When I was a child and all the vegetables were gone, I wrapped the band around my wrist and wore it until it fell off on its own, or I simply grew tired of wearing it. You've always said, let's eat together like an elk among brothers, and now I always eat with you, even when you are not here. When all the vegetables are gone, you wrap the band around my wrist without thinking, like you are knighting me, one of your brothers. I do not know how long the quiet and I will eat together, or how long I will wear the band around my wrist. It will fall off on its own, or I will simply grow tired of wearing it. Perhaps you will wander forever, or perhaps you will someday long for rest and take your seat at the table across from me. When all the vegetables are gone, you'll see my naked wrist and wrap the band around it without thinking. I'll wear it until I fall off on my own, or until it simply grows tired of holding me. This next one is called God-Shaped No Place. This one actually does have a title. God-Shaped No Place. There is nothing I want more than to want more. Some tongues can grow long enough to wrap around the whole world. I have a tongue that shrinks, is full of cramps, does not know how to speak for itself. When it does speak, riddles spring from that primeval cavern. Yes, you know the one. It is the same as the one you have, albeit a different model and make. The cavern only takes us to ourselves and each other. When my tongue gets too small for me to swallow, I remember this. The whole point is to arrive at the God-shaped no place, yes. Every way arrives there, yes. I could just as easily go alone, yes. But you are the only way I want to take. This next one I've titled, There Is Nowhere Else to Go. Our meeting comes, our hearts entangled by the river. I am cold silence. If I let you in, I have to let you go. I knew that you were always meant to run through my hands, like water. I suppose intimacy without death is not intimacy at all. Nothing really dies during death, anyway. Where could it possibly have gone? There's nowhere else to go. Each time I release him, it is for good. Each time I receive him, he is someone else. Who will I meet when I see you again? Who will I be when I meet you? This one is called Navigations for a Dreamweaver. One can only traverse so much of the abyss in one moment. It is okay to dip your toes in the ocean, even when the whole thing beckons all at once. I kept the no diving sign on hand in case I encounter a fool today. I was a reckless diver once, enticed by the glinting light at the bottom of a lake. Ah, the sea. She is so humbling in her willingness to drown me. I am so humbled that it makes me brave enough to dip my toes in and pray that on this night her hunger is tame, that it will be some other night, perhaps, on which she sweeps me away. This one is called I Give to You These Mountains. Naeem's whole family is gone. He tells me that he does not know a warm embrace. I am not a savior, but he dies slowly on the very soil mine was born on. Those who claim the Savior dead would have denied him living. They do not know that salvation is the vow we make to serve love and love alone. When Naeem asks me to be his friend, I fight the urge to turn my face away, to pretend I do not see it. But salvation is the peace we bring with us when we travel into hell. So I tell Naeem that I will give him one warm embrace every day from my spirit. I will show him this world still has beautiful things, like the mountains outside my window, like the crows that wake me every morning. They've taken so much from him, but they cannot destroy our shared love for the mountains. They cannot rob him of my spirit's warm embrace. There will always be beautiful things in this world. I will show him one every day until he dies. This one is also actually titled. It's called Watch the Birds for Once. The deer in my visions keep saying, let's eat together, as if it weren't a profound, ceremonial act of love. The one that refuses to eat is in protest, begging to be fed, a request for evidence of what's kept at arm's length. To chase is to push away. To demand is to neglect. All this unlit fire was just waiting for a reason to scream, but there was never a need. The scream is life trying to liberate itself from frantic fingers that scratch away the surface, searching for meaning. Not everything is an omen. Maybe just watch the birds for once. The truth was never hidden in the shape of a murmuration. It was always front and center in the noticing. Here's another one. I do not keep the ocean in a jar, not anymore. To capture a thing is to rob it of its beauty. Love is the space between two as they touch, but that's not the right word, is it? I cannot speak, so I feed you bread that I made with my own hands and give you this book I know you would like. I knew you would like it, but that's not the right word either, is it? I sit next to you in silence so you can hear the way each of my breaths leads into the next. I gaze into an empty corner of my living room and think that I should put a piano there, so you can come play it whenever you like. I call the ocean to me now, so it can stay as vast and far away as it needs to. Far away, yes, but still there. Here's another one. I hate it when folks say you don't know me, when they say you don't see me. Is there even such a thing as you? What is it? What is that which you call yourself but a collection of stories yoked to a sack of bones? What else but an echo of ghost whispers which follows you around? It is not nothing. It is not unimportant. That is not my point if I have one. My point, if I have one, is that of course nobody knows you. By your own impossible standards, you don't even know you. And yet your beloved brings you fruit in the morning because he knows it is the best way to wake you up in time for work. Your best friend comes home and slides a little green mug across the table and says, "This made me think of you." You show your brother a music video that you think he would like, and he says, "I liked that," and you say, "I knew you would. I knew you would. I know you." Maybe I will never memorize the names of all the places where you gathered every scar. Maybe I will never finish your sentence before you start it. But I know you. I know you can never be known the same way the whole universe can never be in its entirety known. Ah, but it can be known in the biblical sense. It can be traced with the fingers, kissed, wrinkled, sipped, inhaled, beheld. Ah, but it can be known. You just don't know what knowing is. Here is another one. The bright light came with tinkling laughter, a beautiful mask, a tongue full of spells. Every word exactly what you'd rather hear than the biting truth of love's unyielding flame. The light descended and the dull, dank pit took hold. With chains abound, regret writhes in every corner. Neither masks nor faces keep within the kingdom's abhorrent twin. It is neither time nor place, only what it is to have forgotten. Remembrance never comes too late. Even here there can be found the quietest of prayers. A lamp swallows evil's heart and keeps it safely. Yes, even here, love's unyielding flame waits always. That one is about the devil. That was inspired by the devil card in the tarot, actually. This is a very short one. He is a spaceship and she is a nourishing bowl of your favorite soup. And those things don't seem like they should go together, but as a spaceship myself, I think when I come back to Earth, the first thing I'll want is a nourishing bowl of my favorite soup. I have about 9 minutes, I think, right? Okay, I'm gonna read.
Just go as long as you feel like. Yeah.
Okay. Trying to think about. Okay, maybe I won't read those. I'm literally just going in reverse chronological order of like when they were published, so. Okay, I'll just keep doing that. Okay. These days, I am in a different kind of love. The kind that does not announce itself so loudly. The kind that is less of an exploding star in the chest and more of a warm caress from gravity. The kind that stands in the kitchen and invites you to eat bread smothered in oil, covered in pink salt, straight from its hands. The kind that brushes the eyelash from your cheek and says, "Make a wish." That says, "Come in and warm up before you go." The kind that keeps you standing in the kitchen for hours, eating bread smothered in oil, laughing yourself to death while it makes a big pot of soup. You stand in the kitchen and laugh so much you forget to call the cab. You forget to go home because you don't need to, because you're already there. This one is another titled one. I have more titled ones than I thought. It's called Being with the Hunger. I let the love spill out of my dreams and into my bones. I let the love wrestle me gently to the ground, make contact, melt me upon impact. I have been with the hunger, and I have been with the quiet, and I have been with the noise, and now I let you lead my heart to stillness. I have said all of my goodbyes. I have said yes to you dreaming as many times as I have needed to. I can still hear the angels singing the names of 1,000 men. I can still sit with the hunger, still let it pin me down gently like a wind's kiss in warm spring. But I am ready for winter to be over. I am ready for scents and tongues laced with each other's secret wishes. I let you wrestle me to the ground. I let you pin me into place like a wandering heart against a map covered in castles I've never seen. Will I do this one?
Do it, do it,
No.
do it.
Okay. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this one. It's very hyper specific, but you gave me the thumbs up, so I'm gonna go ahead. All right.
Hyper
You were in my
specific is
dream.
good. Sorry. Please begin again. I interrupted you there.
That's okay. That's okay. Uh, you were in my dream again last night. I almost called to tell you about how you found me in that crowd somehow out of everyone, lying on the couch, not expecting to be sought. You lay down with me and you smiled. It was not your usual winning smile. It was awestruck, dumb, like a child on Christmas. I love you, you said. Of course you do, I said. I knew it all along, I said, but you finally said it. You finally said it. You finally said it. And then you left. Like in every other dream, pulled off by some mysterious other, something more important, more urgent, more comfortable than love. I woke up wondering how much longer I should pretend to believe the lie, that these dreams are somehow less real than the winning smile you hide behind, that I didn't know it all along, that there is anything more urgent, more important, more comfortable than love. I'm laughing at myself because every poem's a love poem. Um, oh, this one is a sexy poem. um, the sun has made me languid. I am soft against the grass, crushing these violets under my weight. They erupt with scent onto me, offering nectar, falling open, asking to be eaten. I want so much to be like the violets, crushed under your weight, erupting with scent onto you. Falling open like the violets, I offer my nectar, asking to be eaten. um, yeah. Let's see. Um, okay, I have two more, and then I think that feels pretty complete. Um, cool. Okay. I want nothing more to know until the knowing comes knocking. The drapes are drawn, the door is shut, I am not home. Longing is so sweet when first she enters, with a dream so soft in its emptiness. She never mentions just how hollow it can feel when she is gone in the morning, when she leaves your hands weakened with the weight of what you asked for. What terror! This dream is alive and breathing, waking me in the middle of the night, wanting. She never mentioned how its eyes would be so tender, looking up at me, saying, "What now? What now?" I never pictured it, quite this shape, this texture. Never knew a dream could be so heavy, so warm, so hungry. I don't know what to feed it. I cradle it to sleep, so in the respite I will have my own chance to weep. I do not know why I'm weeping, only that it is not the same reason why I wept before. I think that departed emptiness deserves a funeral as much as anything else. Okay. One more. Another nice hyper-specific one. These days, we only see each other at parties. I noticed you hours before I even said hi. I'm still thinking about what happened, you see, about how that island covered our shared heart in paper cuts. Turns out that at the bottom of all my rage there was a wellspring of grief. I wonder what lies at the bottom of that, if it even ends at all. None of it was anybody's fault, you see. We are just clumsy at this thing called loving each other. It did not start with us, this strange rage, but hopefully it ends here, with our hands fumbling on the dance floor, with you twirling and stepping on my toes, with me watching you dance with her while I am dancing with him. I watch her and think, yes, well done. That is exactly how he wants to be loved, isn't it? Meanwhile, you and I, we are so clumsy at this thing called loving each other. We are learning, aren't we, by watching the others. We are learning how to twirl without stepping on each other's toes. One day you will dip me and I will not fall. But for now I laugh as our feet tangle. I look at you and I tell you with my eyes, I love you so much that I barely even felt it.
Bravo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
It is really nice.
I guess my first, I just had something was sticking with me as your poem, like a thought, and that was the idea of intimacy and death.
Exactly, yeah.
You said there's no intimacy without death. I thought that was very beautiful, and it seems true, but I wonder if you could elaborate that on that a little bit.
I don't know if I can, but let's see.
Mhm.
Um,
Maybe you could just make another poem out of it.
yeah, it's
Because
if I
it's
it's
bad to
yeah.
propositionalize sometimes too, right? You make it too concrete or whatever, but
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's more of something felt like when I in my contemplation practice, I do the contemplative prayer practice.
Mm.
Not every morning because it's so simple that it is almost like bothers me, but I try to do it as many mornings as I can, and the whole entire practice is to just let go of anything that arises. Um, not pushing away, not grasping, not thinking about three characteristics or anything like that. Just it arises and you offer it back, or offering it to God, so to speak. And um there's a sort of self-emptying version of love that I seek to practice, and a lot of my poems are actually about how I struggle to do that. And so that poem in particular was about someone who was very not good for me that I continued to engage with because the letting go is often so difficult that at least for me, and I know that this is the case for a lot of people, the delusion that comes in to try to kind of justify attachment is very sneaky. And the sort of as it inevitably crumbled, my relationship with that person, the wisdom that came through was, oh, I guess, this was always going to, like, even if it was going to work out, it would have ended in death. The best that we can hope for is, to be present with a loved one as they die. I would think that, that's the deepest form of intimacy is being really, really hyper present in the goodbye. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, that's kind of it's more felt for me than it is something that I can explain. But there's a freedom to it, there's a peace to it, and then there's also a sorrow in it as well that allows the love to kind of come through without the delusion of thinking, oh, I own this person or this can last forever or something along those lines.
Yeah. Seemed like there's a lot of religious language in your poetry. Like you said, salvation, you take salvation when you travel into hell with you. That I felt also was an interesting line. And so this sort of emptying yourself out, like Meister Eckhart talks about the no thingness of God, or just,
Yeah.
you know, the apophatic state of emptying.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess that is really closely linked with, you know, it's like the hyper specific, and then the larger kind of come together, or the finite and the infinite come together. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, writing for me is a practice of making the personal abstract. So, um, I don't know if who's familiar with the Enneagram here, but
a little bit.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of the Enneagram as a typology system in particular. I haven't, delved into the more sort of what it is. It's just a map of kind of enlightenment and development,
Mm.
but I know it as a typological system first. That's kind of how it came to me. And I'm a type 4, and I really strongly identify with the shadows of the type 4 in particular. And the pathway um, that the type 4 kind of takes out of its own self absorption is towards deeper philosophical truths, towards one
So
in
what
the
is the
Enneagram.
shadow then of the type four? What is that?
Being so absorbed within the self that you kind of detach from reality and from connection. And especially with the five wing, I have a five wing. It's like a really, really heavy five wing. One can sort of like become so self-focused and so absorbed in one's own personal experience and what one's feelings are, and that making it abstract and yoking it to some sort of higher order truth is kind of the path out of that the self-imposed isolation and the pity and the all of these things that a four can uh, be prone to, which is to see the world through the lens of just how it makes me feel. And so when things happen in my life that are hyper personal, hyper specific, so to speak, and I write poetry about them, it really is to just kind of offer like the self-emptying piece. It is to make it more abstract, to give it back in a way that frees me from myself, if that makes sense. And it becomes more about the human experience. So yeah, there's a lot of like yoking the hyper specific and the personal experience to and bringing this religious language in is a kind of a part of how I do that.
Hmm. So I would have thought of it in the other way. I would have thought that, well, personally, I feel like I live in abstraction too much, and I'm always trying to bring things into a more embodied form. But the way you put it, it's more like I think the particular body gets consumed within itself and needs to connect to a larger body of life somehow, and maybe bringing it outside of yourself and looking at it allows you to sort of
Yeah.
dance with reality more. Or,
Hmm. Yeah,
Something
I know people that are more of a top-down processor, and they need the total opposite. And so yeah, I don't know. It's I'm curious how in group spaces we can kind of cater to both needs,
hmm.
and maybe other needs not mentioned. But when this is like as a group facilitator, I sometimes come up against this. Just because I need to make things abstract doesn't mean that, some people need to make things concrete because they habitually make things abstract. So I'm glad you're bringing this up because this is definitely an inquiry that I'm in right
Hmm.
now. Also, I think Greg wanted to say something.
Please,
Yeah,
yeah.
can you hear me okay, or is it too loud?
It's a
Okay,
bit
there's a
loud. I
bunch of
wonder.
noise, but we can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Oh,
Well,
I
I
was
wonder
just
if
gonna,
you have noise suppression. Do you have like a noise suppression function on Zoom that you can employ?
probably, but I don't know if it's worth me taking.
we can hear you.
It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just an observation, but it's kind of in line with what you guys have been talking about. Is a lot of your poems, and the your use of the you, addressing the you and the love aspect. It makes me think of both the Song of Solomon in the Bible, where you don't know whether it's about two human lovers or if it's about God and people. And it makes me think of Sufjan Stevens, where you don't know whether he's singing to a lover or whether he's singing to Jesus, actually. And I feel like you kind of dance around, even if you're not intending to, like even if you really do have in mind specific people, it just still kind of carries the potential that you're addressing something more ethereal.
Hmm. Um, I love this because I recently did post a poem on my Instagram. Well, not recently, it was a couple months ago, and the caption was I'm either talking about God or some guy, and no one can tell which is which. Also, Sophia and Greg knows this too, and I think that's why you got that cheeky little smile on your face when you said this. But I'm a huge Sufjan Stevens fan. He's definitely a big influence on me, even though it's poetry versus lyricism. But like his lyricism is a massive influence on me because at the end of the day, the mystic orientation experiences everything as God. It's about loving God in the world, really, is how I see it. Or at least for me, it really is about everything being a way to experience God. And so, um, the poetry is really just me reminding myself of that, I think. Writing it as a form of non-attachment. As like when you write something, and you know, writers here can definitely probably attest to this. When you write something, you you don't detach from it, you non-attach to it, if that makes sense. Um, so it stops it no longer is yours, if that makes sense. It belongs to the world now. Once you write about something, once you're giving it to the world. And it actually just becomes like a mirror of your you write about your experience, and then you can actually look at it as if it's not like it doesn't belong to you. And so yeah, the piece about like I'm writing about, it seems like I might be writing about God, but I also might be writing about a person, but I also, you know, this and that is like I often have to write about it to remind myself that I am talking about God, or that I am experiencing, like I'm having a mystical experience. And most of my experiences are mystical in some way. It's kind of like for me it's difficult to fathom that other people don't orient to the world in this way, where like every person that I love, I feel like I've known for lifetimes. There's just like a deep attunement in a lot of my close relationships where I'm just like there's an ancientness to it, and there's a potency to it that I don't think is I used to take for granted, but I realize more in the past couple years is actually very uncommon. Um, and so that's definitely the that's that sensibility that you're sensing, I think, in the poems when they're about specific people. There's a thread of mysticism there because that's how I experience my relationships for the most part.
Yeah, I would say we can say it's persona as well. It's the persona. It's you, but it's not you. It's it's the idea of the persona. Because what I noticed in your poetry, the way you organize the reading, is that the first few poems were non-specific, and not well, the way you put it, non-specific. I wasn't think there was no reference that I could think of to a specific person, but they were much more spatial. They were much more dreamlike, oniric. They were going all these sort of strange places, and then as you read, they became more and more specific, and you started including everyday experiences, like somebody giving him a video, like just very, very everyday, banal kind of experiences entering into that, I would say, into that universe that you established from the beginning. But I would say that
Hmm.
even though you were saying it was specific, I wasn't thinking of anyone in particular, or somehow getting like a picture of your personal life. Oh, okay. So who's that guy? I didn't have that kind of that's minor.
Yeah.
But it was just, once again, it's like the persona. What I find interesting is just the persona. I think each poet, I think when you reach a point where that where it becomes your when you become the person who's the vehicle of that experience, it is a persona in a way. And I think it's
Hmm.
difficulty perhaps of like writing poetry is reaching a point where that persona exists and speaks for you and through you, is you. It has this sort of kind of dynamic relationship that doesn't result in things becoming journalism, basically. So
Mhm.
that's what I found interesting about it. But the way you organize the reading, you established I wouldn't say you established your voice in a way. You established your voice, or that voice, and then you brought everyday things into it that you call specific. But for me, I didn't really experience them as you reporting like your intimate journal to anybody. So
Hmm.
that's the comment, just the idea of persona, and perhaps talking about thinking that, imagining that, or supposing that everybody has this way of somehow being in reality, or is in the intrigue of existence to that point. I think that's perhaps the role, if I can say, or the unlooked for role of the poet, is that. that is that is what you're doing. That's what makes you a poet. Is the urgency of it, the degree of intensity that you live that makes it. But I feel that when you meet people and you get to know them a little bit, I think every human being has that what you call the divine spark in them, if I were to use that term, that kind of platitude. But yeah, but I think perhaps the poet is more like set on fire by that. That spark burns us, and that's why that just came out that way.
Wow. I'm gonna be chewing on that for a long. Thank you for that reflection. Um, yeah, what's coming up for me with that is like I like that you use the words fire and persona. Thanks, Greg. It was good to see you. Um, the words fire and persona are like lighting up for me in what you shared because I'm thinking about poet as bard, poet as like wisdom keeper, as someone who directly transmits the wisdom in metaphor, which is a very unique wisdom. The wisdom that is conveyed through metaphor can only be like poetic wisdom can only be directly transmitted through metaphor, and it has to be felt. It's the kind of wisdom that has to be felt and is typically ineffable, but the poet has a unique quality about them where they can put words to it, which is impossible for most people. They'll feel it, but the poet can not only make you feel it, but they can use words to describe it in a way that if you describe it too accurately, the meaning is not there. And so with persona, I'm thinking a lot about the bardic traditions and the sort of the mask that the bard puts on, the performance persona that the bard puts on, which is in some ways more true to who they are than who they are when they're living in their daily life. And that fire, I mean, I'm very inspired specifically by the Celtic bardic traditions and by the Welsh bardic traditions, specifically the Irish bardic traditions, and also the Welsh bardic traditions. And there is a theme of inspiration and fire representing inspiration, representing the presence of God within, like evoking God within. And the poet, the bard being or the storyteller being a magician of sorts that knows how to court the muse, that knows how to be in relationship to it and then offer that back to other people. And it's poets are understood to be particular kinds of mystics. That's why when I perform when I perform music or movement or something, I take the name Orpheus because Orpheus is his divine wisdom actually comes from grief, from loss. It's like his grief is the portal that opens, or it's like it turns him into a vessel, and the gods feel for him. The unfeeling jealous, dominating Greek gods. They feel for him and they pour power into him so that he can sing. So I guess again coming back to that that intimacy without death is not intimacy at all. That's also kind of part of it, is like, as you've likely noticed, a lot of the poems are about loss or grief or loneliness or yearning or something. Being like an empty space that the sort of divine spark that you're talking about can pour itself into.
Well, I was thinking about, as you were speaking about how when you hear a poetic language, you enter the spirit world, but that spirit world is actually your real home. And the other world, the grief comes from the fact that the other world, there's not like there's two worlds, but your more superficial experience of the world is not your home. It's a place of exile.
Mm,
So it feels like, when Orpheus sings his grief, it also there's a you can breathe and you can feel like you're coming home, you're coming out of exile at the same time as you're experiencing that grief. It's like um like the sorrow and the sense of home. It is are very close somehow.
mm.
Yeah, somehow, especially if you're type 4. God knows we love our sorrow.
Yeah.
Or any kind of intense emotion, really.
Yeah, it depends. What's difficult, I think, about writing poetry, at least when you start having this experience of the persona that's speaking through you, is that at times it's not what you expected or that you want or what you want. I mean, there are things that, like you talked about loss and saying farewell, but how about saying hello? That's
Hmm.
difficult. Saying hello,
Mhm.
Hmm.
just saying
Hmm.
just saying hello is difficult too. Welcoming something in its
Hmm.
absolute beauty and
Hmm.
I would say its absolute fullness, even though perhaps the loss is implicit, but just
Mm.
I think it's really difficult for me, and in my talking about myself a little bit, is that when I started writing poetry, there was a voice that was so far away, so old. It was just like, yeah, that was about your age, more or less, I imagine. And it's like, and there was a voice that was so old, it was so far away, and it was scary because it wasn't like you would like as you put it, like there was loss and grief and the kind of obsession with death, like death radiating through the language in such a way that it wasn't something that I expected. In fact, it came as a kind of like a surprise, almost like a shock. I was quiet. I couldn't speak for. I would be in long stretches of silence. I'd be with friends, and I just would be silent all the time. And it was just so much silence that had like fallen upon me, like a veil had fallen upon me in a way. And it's
Hmm.
difficult. People perhaps run away from that persona when it shows up. They run away from it. That's why poetry is scary, or that's why poets are scary. Perhaps the scary
Hmm.
of them all. Yeah, the
Hmm.
other that.
Hmm.
Well, I guess the deep intimacy again comes with with the fact that you have to die to your shallow persona. And we hold on to that very strongly because we feel it protects us
Mm,
in some
mm,
kind of a way, even though it's really the albatross that we're carrying around. It's not what really protects us. It's kind of
mm,
so yeah, what you said about hello is that's very beautiful too, how it's really hard for us to open up because we're expecting to be hurt or wounded,
mm,
when we open to the world.
mm.
In a sense, there's an expectation of you know the devil will come in or something.
Yeah,
you know so we're like, we put on our shields and armors, so strongly.
yeah, yeah.
You talked about the devil. I wonder
Mm,
what you meant by that.
mm,
Um, well, I was doing this thing for a while where I was writing poems based on tarot cards. And I pulled the devil card one week and I wrote that poem. Um, Love's Unyielding Flame was like the kind of the theme. Um, of this idea of the devil and most trickster figures in a lot of mythologies, because Christianity is interesting because it's like polytheism in disguise in a lot of ways, and this like figure of Satan slash Lucifer is very much like a like a necessary adversary, I would say. And so tarot is very, it comes out of this card game in medieval Italy, which was very Christian at the time in like a way, in like an
It's funny.
Inquisition kind of way.
I swear I picked up my deck and this was the first card. It was like on the bottom. It's the devil card.
Wonderful.
There you go.
I can see it. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
I didn't
and what I
even.
love is,
It's amazing. Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
well, in most depictions of the devil card in the tarot, the chains are, the devil's not holding the chains. He's just like standing there.
Yeah.
And it's sort of this like Baphomet type figure. You know, Eliphas Levi's Baphomet, who is this this like intersex creature with you know, with a goat's head, and is really like an arcane instrument to sort of awakening one's transcendent nature, through kind of what they call, like the Orthodox Christians would call it, the passions, through these so-called human flaws, through these darknesses, through through the absence of light, can the true self be found. And it's sort of like the process comes in confronting that, not necessarily in dismissing it, but constantly confronting it, having the courage, having the patience, having the dedication to see those capabilities we have to become evil, or to be enslaved in some way, or to you know, not take accountability in some way. And the practice, the process of confronting that devil, is kind of what that poem is about. It's about seeing, the line, "Yes, even here love's unyielding flame waits always," is kind of about that, the sort of journey through hell being like a, I always get so curious about, like in the Apostles' Creed, they say, what does Christ do? He descends into hell before he ascends into heaven.
Yeah.
And there aren't very many details about that, but I've just kind of taken that, and I took that and I ran with it, because I'm like, oh, that's like what everyone does. It is this oscillatory process of descending and ascending, and then of course descending again, because there's always more content to be revealed and to process and to transmute. And the poetic practice is really a process of transmutation, for most people, but it's definitely for me, because a lot of those poems that I read, the reason why they don't seem like, yes, they are hyper specific in the sense that I wrote them about particular experiences, but they don't seem that way perhaps from the outside, because writing them is what was the process of transcending. I had descended, and then the poem was the ascension. Writing the poem was the practice of ascension. So,
Yeah, and the more
and you know,
hyper-specific you are, the more universal you are, in a way. It's kind of a paradox. Sorry, I interjected again there, but you were completing your thought there.
no, it's okay. I'm glad you did, because I could just go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Forever, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. The devil has two little friends, but like they are choosing their enslavement.
Mhm.
They can leave at any time, but they choose to be enslaved, and it feels like that's the case of the human passions. Somehow we choose them, and we have to go through them, right? We can't just step aside and, you know, bliss out and just forget about them. We have to really fully live this gestalt of the passions, which means going down into the underworld, and, you know, and transmuting that, finding this gold in the depth of the darkness.
In a way, that's what
Yeah.
perhaps that's what I don't want to call it, well, the rite of passage, if I may, but I'm trying to avoid these terms. But I think that's the gift of poetry, is actually it does start with a certain kind of wilderness, and the gift is actually finding that voice that allows you to ascend. And I think it's specific to each calling that we have. I mean, I think people have their different callings. Not everybody is a poet. That's why the whole idea of well, everybody can be a poet, everybody is an artist. It's not true. I mean, I think that because there is a kind of experience of actually finding in the wilderness. It can be in the wilderness of life. It might be the wilderness that might represent even your genealogy and you being the one who has to deal with it or ascend from that. It can take all different shapes and forms. And I think that's very specific to a calling that you have. Like each calling has this particular moment, this realization.
The calling is like the gift of articulation,
Yes,
which
yes.
not everybody has, but poetry still articulates for everybody in a sense. So it's, again, it's this paradox between the unique and the universal, or the finite and the infinite.
Yeah, and the idea of voice too. The idea of voice. The calling and of hearing. Of leaning in or being forced to lean into the voice that ends up speaking through you, like being dragged by your hair. you know, like being dragged into it. The image of being just seized by the gods or something by your hair and being pulled into that place.
So, Scott, why the pronouns they and them? I'm just curious, and I don't mean that on any political level. I just mean on on a what's that
Because we are
signifies?
legion.
Because we are legion, because there are many of you. Yes, they and them. Yeah, because I guess that's what I was getting at actually. Like Gurdjieff says, human beings are legion. In other words, we're many beings
Yeah.
and sub personalities. We're not just this monolithic person.
I don't really care what pronouns people use for me, actually. I put those there like ages ago. Um and then I kept them because I realized that I feel myself to be quite gender expansive. Um Although like perhaps externally I don't put much effort into like making sure that people know or like see it, but I do, the pronoun thing for me is more of an invitation to kind of step outside of what your default perception of me might be. Because how I experience myself interiorly is quite expansive, quite, like a multiplicity, and any given day I could be inhabiting anywhere on, the spectrum of being, and yeah, just it's an invitation to think creatively about me, and it's less of a demand of like how to address me, if that makes sense. I know for a lot of people, this pronoun thing can be very contentious because no people don't like being told what to do. At the end of the day, I think it's less about respecting or disrespecting someone's identity, and I think it's more about like people don't want to be forced to speak in ways that they haven't volunteered to speak. And also people don't want to be projected on as something that they don't feel themselves to be. And so it's like this both sides, the people that want, that have preferences for a specific set of pronouns and people that really don't like that that's a thing, are actually both just aching for a sense of agency in the world. And for me, the agency is it comes from an invitation, not a demand. So if you are willing to see parts of me that go beyond what you might initially project, that's there for you. And if you don't, then you just don't see things that you're just not seeing them. That doesn't mean that they aren't there, So that's kind of how I view that. Interesting question, Andrew.
Well, there's a lot to see in a person, right? I mean, and there's a lot of mystery, and then there's a lot if you get outside of your representations, learned representations of who a person is, and you try to see that without that kind of a filter, then you're opened up to a whole world that you might not necessarily suspect was there.
I think it's implicit to discovery as well. I think it's implicit to discovering things.
Mhm.
So, I mean, in a way, identifying in that kind of in an expansive way is somehow trying to give the keys to discover. Whereas I think people tend to be subjective, they have their subjective experience. Perhaps it might even feel like your experience of discovery is being appropriated almost by somehow that being enforced in a way. When it goes beyond just individual relationships or intimate relationships, when it becomes like institutionalized, then it becomes like we're in France, like I'm in France with Andrew, and we have a Ministry of Culture. And one thing about that is that they tend to try to create norms, to institutionalize norms of culture that might come out of like very subjective experiences of art that become institutionalized. It's almost like pushing everybody to be a surrealist or being it's like now we're all situationists. So it's sort of like it turns it into like an institutionalized kind of within a legal framework at time, and then it becomes difficult, I think, for people to actually have that implicit sense of discovery.
And people love their categories because it makes them feel kind of safe and
Yeah.
but yeah, people love categories.
Well, I think when we institutionalize things, what we're trying to do is skip steps in cultural evolution, and what really creates a cultural change is inviting a different way of seeing things. So as soon as we look to a sense of external authority to enforce something, it corrupts that thing. And it is no longer authentically that thing. It is like a flattened, cheapened, authoritative version of that thing. Categorization is just inevitable. It's part of it's a sort of survival cognitive faculty. We're always going to do it, but the minute that we take those categories and we concretize them in the form of some kind of an institution, we're failing. The poet, what's again, you said poets are scary, and I think part of that is because poets are renegades. As soon as you speak to something in a poem, you're never really quite naming it. You're referring to it. That's part of what makes a poem elusive. That's part of why it's not for everyone, is because you have to get comfortable with naming the unnameable and never fully quite getting to it, just pointing toward it so that people can feel it for themselves. And that is why art is always the vehicle of cultural transformation, of true cultural transformation. And not like some sort of structural, institutionalized, enforced thing. What would it take for us to view each other in a poetic way is kind of what I'm thinking. Because then, there's again an invitation to point towards something ineffable within the other person. Gender expansive people have, not always, but especially lately, have posed a little bit of a, or at least we used to pose a little bit of a challenge to categorization. But as soon as you start to kind of enforce categorization within that framework, it almost loses its potency. It loses its role in society, which is kind of to remind people that you can't really concretize things. You can point towards them, you can name them, but it's always going to be this temporary thing that really the point of language is to invite us to feel certain things about reality, not to box reality into what we want it to be.
Yeah. It's like the edge tried to be the center, or I mean, there's a reason why it's on the edge. It's on the edge because it's exploring what's outside of the perimeters of what we consider to be known reality. So when you say that is this is the category, then you're making that the center instead of the edge, whereas it lives on the edge and it needs to it needs to retain that kind of ambiguous quality, I think. Um, and
Yeah,
I
I think
think poetry's always had that. It's the poets are always a little bit on the edge because they're reaching out into the unknown to get new information and to hear new voices, which aren't heard in ordinary transmission. And I think that I really think that it's like it's so important, but it's so subtle at the same time.
yeah, and it demands, I think, also demands a certain degree of faith. It's like when you're talking about just letting it go, like releasing it. It's no longer belongs to you. To let it be in a way, to let it just take on its own life, let it take on its own strange, scary shape in the world. And I think it's almost like needing to put something in a category or even wanting to be in a category is almost being afraid of of oneself in a way. It's like being terrified of yourself. It's like, please stop me. It's sort of like, it's like, you know, please chain me up. I can't take it anymore. It's almost
Hmm.
stop me.
Hmm.
It's
And and so like there's something about like containment that as like a ritual practitioner, containment is extremely important.
Mm.
Um, Cultivating like a vessel. So one way of seeing a poet is as a vessel. I have this piece that I wrote about like two metaphors to describe an artist, and the first metaphor is portal between, and the second metaphor is mirror to. And so as a portal between, you're kind of taking things from the other world or like from the unconscious, which I would argue is a realm, not necessarily like within the individual psyche, but there's like a shared unconscious, this collective unconscious, if you will, bringing it to the surface. And then mirror two is kind of it's in the other direction as like in more fully embodying oneself as the artist or putting on that persona, you are then reflecting back something about the collective psyche. So you're pulling things from within to without, and then you're reflecting things so that other people can kind of do the same thing. And it's an incredibly mysterious and terrifying process.
Yeah. Maybe I'd like, what is the crossover between, let's say, the edges of mysticism and art and poetry? I'm always thinking about that. I'm always thinking about uh
Mm-hmm.
because I find that poetry that doesn't have a mystical aspect to it kind of seems reductive and boring and too personal or something, or too like diary-esque, and people kind
Mm-hmm.
of fall into that trap of personality, right? Um, Not this magical persona that Joseph's talking about, but personality. And then there's also the mystical realm, which isn't necessarily about personal expression or embodiment, and yet it is. And so I'm kind of wondering about the edge of those two things, those two
Mm-hmm.
realms, poetry and mysticism.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because that's the question I ask myself as well. It's like, when do you go from being a poet to a priest? What
Yeah.
is the point? Before, like, what's the step just before you become a priest, and do you want to become one
And
or
that's,
not?
I think, why I'm asking Scout, because she also does this oracular stuff and these ritual stuff, which seems to be in the religious realm. So I think originally those two things were together, and somehow they've been pulled apart. And I sense you're trying to pull them back together again. Is that?
I think it's all one thing for me, and the notion that they can even be pulled apart, I think, is another one of those. those kind of like not, it's just not real. It's kind of like, when did science stop being magic and when did magic stop being science? Well, never. We just entered into this perceptive mode that required us to numb certain parts of ourselves. So it's like, it's not so much that these things became separate, it's that we became numb. We numbed the parts of us that can make the connections between things. And so we're unable to see. And when I say we, I really mean like modern, Western educated, um, like Americans is a more
Yeah,
specific
this hyper
example.
rational, hyper secular,
Yeah,
hyper kind of like reductive, just worldview
yeah,
is so shallow
yeah.
and so painfully shallow.
Yeah, and it's, you can see, if you pay attention, you can see how it is unaware of its own influences and how it rebels against its own
Yes.
influences, theologically, poetically, all of this stuff. I mean, I see it all the time in the way that people take Jungian psychoanalysis out of context and they use words like shadow and this and that, and like they don't actually even know where it comes from.
Mm.
The cultural figure that influenced it, and then the cultural figures that influenced him, they're not even aware of. Um, and so, we get into this mode where we're using like psychological language and we're using theological language and we're using these metaphors that we're not aware of the origins, but it doesn't mean that we're not invoking those powers. So again, and this is might just be because I'm a poet, and you might both understand this as poets, but um, the poetic voice is an invocation. It's a voice of invocation, and so it's again kind of self-emptying and calling through that divine spark, as Joseph was speaking to earlier, even if it doesn't know it's doing that. um, just like when we hyper categorize things and we separate them, all we're doing is creating an experience of separation for ourselves in which we don't see the actual truth, which is we don't see the relationality between things. It doesn't mean things stop being relational by any means. We just operate in delusion where things are not relational. And it mostly just sucks for us. It doesn't really. I mean, there are implications for the planet and politics and all of that, which we're seeing more and more of that. Um, but I've never experienced these things as separate from each other, and I used to think that that was a problem and kind of try to like parse things out of like, oh, well, is this blah, blah, blah. And like the more that I've devoted myself to writing poetry, which I've been writing poetry since I was 18, I think, was when I started really writing it. Because what happened was I went to college, I found out that I had learning disabilities, I wasn't able to get the accommodations that I needed, and I had all these feelings about it, and I just started writing it was just the next instinctual logical step, because I was like,
Yeah.
I think unconsciously I was thinking, what will save my life right now? What is it that would save my life? And
It's like a
it's
form of
poetry.
prayer, isn't it? It's kind of like
Yeah.
at that stage when you're in
Yeah.
a state of crisis, you're calling on being in a way to
Mhm.
rescue you and give you a voice and in your crisis.
Mhm.
Can relate to that. It's so true. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. But I mean the greatest in my opinion, the greatest spiritual wisdom comes in the form of verse. Like you have the Tao, you have the Psalms, you have Rumi. There's
Sure.
just it lands for the people that aren't even in those religions, that don't even have those devotional practices. There's a universality to them where it catches people. It catches people and it calls them back. Poetry can do that in a way that theology can't, in a way that that scientific rationalism can't. Um,
Hmm. Yep.
and even people like for example, Tom Hearns is a poet that I really admire. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he wrote this poem called "Sometimes a Wild God," which is kind of like
Oh yeah.
went viral. Yeah. So Tom uses a lot of like uh he uses a lot of religious metaphor in his work. Like he has a book called Queen of Heaven, for example, and the name of his publishing company is Feral Angels Press, right? And I actually got on a call with Tom, and we talked a little bit about the religious sensibility, which I firmly, strongly have a religious sensibility. Not so much as like I don't necessarily have a particular belief system that I adhere to, but I do have practices that I am rooted in. And Tom was just kind of like, yeah, I don't really like believe in any of that stuff, and yet the metaphors speak to him.
It's wild, yeah.
So yeah. So there's something about how the poetic and the symbolic within mythos and religion, there's something deeper there than just what you believe about reality or
I don't think
what
it has
rules.
anything to do with belief, actually. It's not like a propositional belief, almost ever, right? And that's the, or at least that's the most superficial side of it. Interesting, just as an aside, like I read that poem you're talking about, The Wild God, on Nick Cave's site. And because he has an album called Wild God, I think, that came out that was based on that. And he said that he didn't believe in God unless he was on the stage, and then he believed in God. But then his son died, and he's become kind of religious because of the depth of that kind of pain, right? It's sort of transformed him as a person into somebody that is not nihilistic anymore. You know, he kind of lost his nihilism at a very late age, and I think that's an interesting thing, like that could happen to people. That, you know, we tend to be nihilistic until we experience very, very deep suffering, like the loss of a child, and then suddenly the world becomes sort of a cosmic song again through that grief, because that's what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation about the grief and the sorrow of Orpheus.
Yeah, and the rebirth as well, to be reborn, not in the sense of born again Christian, well, but in the sense of rebirth after being torn to shreds and just being nothing again, and then emerging from that. And wow, these are my hands. This is my nose. These are my, I'm here, I'm alive. I mean, just, that's what I mentioned, the whole idea of saying hello, you know, like just like, I'm here, you know, this high idea of being present. I think that is like a kind of religious experience, if I could say that. I mean, that I think that is like an experience of faith in a way, an experience of gratitude. Let's just put it that way. And I think perhaps the question about like the edge of that fine line between art and religion, I think it has more to do with when it becomes like a theology, and then it becomes a system, and it becomes an institution, because it always has to, every generation, every human being is going to have to be, well, a poet at least is going to be on their own edge. So I think it's a kind of thing that's eternal in a way. It's like an eternal cycle, and every poet is going to be brought to his or her own edge and push things forward. But it's when it becomes this sort of like fixed system, you know, when it becomes religion per se, you know, when it becomes theology per se, when it becomes, I think that's perhaps the edge. The edge is when it starts becoming theology and institutionalized religion, and then idolatry and stuff like that. Perhaps that's it. Otherwise,
I think
you just do what you want.
I think there's a benefit to there being some sort of communal structure and agreement, because there's a sense of belonging. I mean, even before you have monotheistic institutionalized religions that then become mega churches that then scam people, you have a cosmology of people who are intimate over generations with a particular bioregion, and you have a cosmology that emerges from that intimacy, and then you have beliefs about the world that emerge from that intimacy. And then you have, if you have religions that are completely devoid of that, I think that once religion became a function of domination and control rather than um, a function of creating intimacy and that presence that you're talking about, then we have a problem. But gosh, what's coming to mind is how John Vervaeke kind of talks about religion and the
Yeah, me too.
etymology of the word. Yeah,
Religare and religio. And
yeah,
what does
yeah.
religare mean? I know religio is kind of just the need for this communal sort of um, participation.
Well, I could be
Doesn't.
remembering it incorrectly, and I'm going to look it up, but my understanding is that it has to do with tying oneself, like
Yeah,
yoking
yes,
oneself
right.
to
Yoking
something
with himself. That's religare.
bigger.
Hmm.
Yeah, which is interesting because we have this idea of, again, in the like modern Western educated kind of paradigm, we have this idea of what yoga is, which is this movement practice. It's like
Oh, God,
we
yeah.
do yoga to get sexy, right? But yoga actually is the same it means union. It's the same meaning as, religare.
Yeah, yoking
It's
yourself to the divine, right?
yeah.
Yoking
Yeah,
yourself.
to
Yeah. Hmm.
not even just yoking yourself, but like the continuous practice of coming back into union,
Hmm.
because there's the longing, there's the separation, there's the space between. And that's a recurring theme in my poems as well, is there's like a huge ache. And what is that ache for? Sometimes we think it's for a person, and then we write a poem about it, and then we realize it's actually to come into union with some sort of divine other, like a capital B beloved, as opposed to like a lowercase b beloved. Um,
I don't think we're good in the
yeah.
West at sort of understanding those two things. Like we tend to
Mhm.
deify our partner or something like that. And, which there's a truth to that. But then like in India, you would go and you'd worship Kali and go into ecstasies. And then you know the difference between your ordinary life, your daily life and that kind of intensity. But
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's one thing that I want to say, like just to make, just to be a bit clear about what I'm trying to say when it comes to the idea of that edge or that fine line between poetry and priesthood, is that I think the situation, like for example, what we're doing here. I mean, we've had quite a few readings. There are very few people who show up, and we just share these very, very wonderful conversations. And there's an urgency. We know it's urgent to for poetry to speak its part and to be part of the process, or to go deeper into the process, considering the change that we're in. Like there's a like technology and the changes that we're experiencing collectively, and perhaps the temptation is, because of the urgency, is to try to like create some kind of church around it to
mhm.
protect it. And we're in a very vulnerable situation, and that's why perhaps the yoking oneself, perhaps the poetry that's going to come out of this period is going to be so intense, because there's the need to yoke oneself with even more intensity. And being a poet is holding on to that faith and just going with it and going with the flow of it, and leaving it to God, just, which doesn't mean not having community or having communion with others, but the idea of trying to create some kind of a church out of it. It's a temptation. I'm not saying it's wrong, right? But it's just, that's the question that I have, is like,
Yeah.
because I feel like both of you and most of us who have been here for these readings, like the need, like the yoking, or the need to hold on to that thread in this labyrinth of like technological and God knows what is going on, is so urgent. So I think perhaps that's the thing first and foremost to keep in mind, and to take with ultimate seriousness. I mean, but what will come of it, that's something that we're going to see. But already being aware of it, and really being part of the process of it, taking the responsibility for it too, in each in his own, each in his or her own way, is I think for me personally that's what's really the most urgent thing. Though I might be tempted to create, a church
And
out of
that's all we can do, right? We're not in charge of the result, right? In a way, I think if we try to construct something, uh, uh, if we reify, like if I tried to turn Parallax into this major online church sort of thing, right? It would defeat the purpose of what it is, which is sort of filling the space with spirit,
Mm,
and then allowing that to go where it needs to go, rather than there's an urgency, and yet at the same time you have to slow down, like
yeah.
it's at the same time, I think.
Mm.
I have to go.
Yeah.
But it was really lovely talking to both of you. Brilliant conversation.
Yeah, I hope we can
And
do it again, or in some other form. And thanks a lot for your wonderful poetry. Um, yeah.
sure thing. Yeah, anytime. And I did put my the article that I mentioned about the artist as a catalyst for systems change with the two metaphors. I put that in the chat. So if either of you are interested in reading it, you can go ahead, and I welcome feedback because there's a lot of jargon there and I
Yeah.
don't know how accessible it is, but yeah.
So is
Thank
there
you very
anything you
much.
want to say, like just to our listeners before you go, or how to find your work, and just to, how to connect with you in some way, and if they
Yeah.
feel.
Um, so I guess the best way, or the way that I prefer, is my Substack, because most of my writing and poetry and all of the poems that I read today can be found on there. So if you had one that you particularly liked and you wanted to read it again, you will find it on my Substack, and that is Hyperphantasia. So Hyper Phantasia. They wouldn't let me spell it with just one I, so I spelled it with two I's. Yeah, but hyperphantasia.substack.com. You can subscribe to me there, but mostly everything, minus like one or two posts a month, are completely free, so you don't have to subscribe to have access to them. But there's other options if you want to subscribe. There's, you know, you can up to getting a free Oracle session with me if you're interested in that. There's also like ways that you can work with me one-to-one on there, but all of the details will be on there. And yeah, I hope you join me and read some more of my writing.
Thanks so much, Scott. Really lovely.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you. Take
Good
take
night.
care.